So welcome to the second part of our performance of an inspector course. We're going to be reading Act 2 for you now. So just a reminder, at the end of Act 1, Gerald revealed that he did actually know Daisy Renton, but he wanted to try and keep it from the inspector. Sheila told Gerald that she was fairly certain the inspector already knew what his involvement was, and so we left it on a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of Act 1. So we'll get straight on with Act 2. At Rise, scene and situation are exactly as they were at the end of Act 1. The inspector remains at the door for a few moments, looking at Sheila and Gerald. Then he comes forward, leaving the door open behind him.
Well?
You see? What did I tell you?
What did you tell him?
Inspector, I think Miss Birling ought to be excused any more of this questioning. She's nothing more to tell you. She's had a long, exciting and tiring day. We were celebrating our engagement, you know, and now she's obviously had about as much as she can stand. You heard her.
He means I'm getting hysterical now.
And are you?
Probably.
Well, I don't want to keep you here. I've no more questions to ask you.
No, but you haven't finished asking questions, have you?
No.
You see? Then I'm staying.
Why should you? It's bound to be unpleasant and disturbing.
And you think young women ought to be protected against unpleasant and disturbing things?
If possible, yes.
Well, we know one young woman who wasn't, don't we?
I suppose I asked for that.
Be careful you don't ask for any more, Gerald.
I only meant to say to you, why stay when you'll hate it?
It can't be any worse for me than it has been, and it might be better.
I see.
What do you see?
You've been through it and now you want to see somebody else put through it.
So that's what you think I'm really like. I'm glad I realised it in time, Gerald.
No, I didn't mean...
Yes, you did. And if you'd really loved me, you couldn't have said that. You listened to that nice story about me. I got that girl sacked from Millwoods. And now you've made up your mind, I must obviously be a selfish, vindictive creature.
I neither said that nor even suggested it.
Then why say I want to see somebody else put through it? That's not what I meant at all.
All right, I'm sorry.
Yes, but you don't believe me. And this is just the wrong time not to believe me.
Allow me, Miss Birling. I can tell you why Miss Birling wants to stay on and why she says it might be better for her if she did. A girl died tonight. A pretty lively sort of girl who never did anybody any harm, but she died in misery and agony, hating life.
Don't, please. I know, and I can't stop thinking about it.
Now Miss Birling has just been made to understand what she did to this girl. She feels responsible. And if she leaves us now and doesn't hear any more, then she'll feel she's entirely to blame. She'll be alone with her responsibility the rest of tonight, all tomorrow, all the next night.
Yes, that's it. And I know I'm to blame and I'm desperately sorry, but I won't believe it's simply my fault that in the end she committed suicide. That would be too horrible.
You see, we have to share something. If there's nothing else, we'll have to share our guilt.
Yes, that's true. You know, I don't understand about you.
There's no reason why you should.
Good evening, Inspector.
Good evening, madam.
I'm Mrs. Birling, you know. My husband has just explained why you're here, and while we'll be glad to tell you anything you want to know, I don't think we can help you much.
No, Mother, please.
What's the matter, Sheila?
I know it sounds silly.
What does?
You see, I feel you're beginning all wrong, and I'm afraid you'll say something or do something that you'll be sorry for afterwards.
I don't know what you're talking about, Sheila.
We all started like that, so confident, so pleased with ourselves, until he began asking us questions.
You seem to have made a great impression on this child, Inspector.
We often do on the young ones. They're more impressionable.
You're looking tired, dear. I think you ought to go to bed and forget about this absurd business. You'll feel better in the morning.
Mother, I couldn't possibly go. Nothing could be worse for me. We've settled all that. I'm staying here until I know why that girl killed herself.
Nothing but morbid curiosity.
No, it isn't.
Please don't contradict me like that. And in any case, I don't suppose for a moment that we can understand why this girl committed suicide. Girls of that class.
Mother, don't. Please don't. For your own sake, as well as ours, you mustn't.
Must what, really, Sheila?
You mustn't try to build up a kind of wall between us and that girl. If you do, then the inspector will just break it down, and it'll be all the worse when he does.
I don't understand you. Do you?
Yes. And she's right.
I beg your pardon.
I said, yes, I do understand her, and she's right.
That, I consider, is a trifle impertinent, Inspector. Now what is it, Sheila?
I don't know. Perhaps it's because impertinent is such a silly word.
In any case...
But, Mother, do stop before it's too late.
If you mean that the inspector will take offence...
No, I never take offence.
I'm glad to hear it. Though I must add, it seems to me we have more reason for taking offence.
Let's leave offence out of it, shall we?
I think we'd better.
So do I.
I'm talking to the inspector now, if you don't mind. I realise that you may have to conduct some sort of inquiry, but I must say that so far you seem to be conducting it in a rather peculiar and offensive manner. You know, of course, that my husband was Lord Mayor only 2 years ago and that he's still a magistrate.
Mrs. Birling, the inspector knows all that, and I don't think it's a very good idea to remind him.
It's crazy. Stop it, please, Mother.
Yes. Now, what about Mr. Birling?
He's coming back in a moment. He's just talking to my son, Eric, who seems to be in an excitable, silly mood.
What's the matter with him?
Eric, I'm afraid, he may have had rather too much to drink tonight. We were having a little celebration here.
Isn't he used to drinking?
No, of course not. He's only a boy.
No, he's a young man. And some young men drink far too much.
And Eric's one of them.
Sheila!
I don't want to get poor Eric into trouble. He's probably in enough trouble already. But we really must stop these silly pretences. This isn't the time to pretend that Eric isn't used to drink. He's been steadily drinking too much for the last 2 years.
It isn't true. You know him, Gerald, and you're a man. You must know if it's true.
Well, Mr. Croft?
I'm afraid it is, you know. Actually, I've never seen much of him outside this house, but, well, I have gathered that he drinks pretty hard.
And this is the time you choose to tell me.
Yes, of course it is. That's what I meant when I talked about building up a wall that's sure to be not flat. It makes it all the harder to bear.
But it's you and not the inspector here who's doing it.
Yes, but don't you see? He hasn't started on you yet.
If necessary, I shall be glad to answer any questions the inspector wishes to ask me, though naturally I don't know anything about this girl.
We'll see, Mrs. Birling.
I've been trying to persuade Eric to go to bed, but he won't. Now he says you told him to stay up. Did you?
Yes, I did.
Why?
Because I shall want to talk to him, Mr. Birling.
I can't see why you should, but if you must, then I suggest you do it now. Have him in and get it over, then let the lad go.
No, I can't do that yet, I'm sorry. But he'll have to wait.
Now look here, Inspector.
He must wait his turn.
You see?
No, I don't. And please be quiet, Sheila.
Inspector, I've told you before, I don't like your tone, nor the way you're handling this inquiry, and I don't propose to give you much more rope.
You needn't give me any rope.
No, he's giving us the rope, so we'll hang ourselves.
What's the matter with that child?
Overexcited, and she refuses to go. Well, come along. What is it you want to know?
At the end of January last year, this girl, Eva Smith, had to leave Millwoods because Miss Birling compelled them to discharge her. And then she stopped being Eva Smith, looking for a job, and became Daisy Renton with other ideas. Mr. Croft, when did you first get to know her?
Where did you get the idea that I know her?
It's no use, Gerald. You're wasting time.
As soon as I mentioned the name Daisy Renton, it was obvious you'd known her. You gave yourself away at once.
Of course you did.
And anyhow, I knew already. When and where did you first meet her?
Right. You must have it. I met her first sometime in March last year in the Stalls Bar at the Palace. I mean, the Palace Music Hall here in Brumley.
Well, we didn't think you meant Buckingham Palace.
Thanks. You're going to be a great help, I can see. You've said your piece and you're obviously going to hate this, so why on earth don't you leave us to it?
Nothing would induce me. I want to understand exactly what happens when a man says he's so busy at the works he can hardly ever find time to come and see the girl he's supposed to be in love with. I wouldn't miss it for worlds.
Yes, Mr. Croft, in the Stalls Bar at the Palace Variety Theatre.
I happened to look in one night after a long, dull day, and as the show wasn't very bright, I went down into the bar for a drink. It's a favourite haunt of women of the town.
Women of the town?
Yes, but I don't see no point in mentioning the subject, especially...
It would be much better if Sheila didn't listen to this story at all.
But you're forgetting. I'm supposed to be engaged to the hero of it. Go on, Gerald. You went down into the bar, which is a favourite haunt of women of the town.
Glad I amuse you.
Come along, Mr. Croft. What happened?
I didn't propose to stay long down there. I hate those hard-eyed, dour-faced women, but then I noticed a girl who looked quite different. She was very pretty, soft brown hair and big, dark eyes. My God!
What's the matter?
Sorry, I've suddenly realised, taken it in properly, that she's dead.
Yes, she's dead.
And probably between us, we killed her.
Sheila, don't talk nonsense.
You wait, Mother.
Go on.
She looked young and fresh and charming and altogether out of place down there, and obviously she wasn't enjoying herself. Old Joe Meggerty, half-drunk and goggle-eyed, had wedged her into a corner with that obscene fat carcass of his.
There's no need to be disgusting. And surely you don't mean Alderman Meggerty.
Of course I do. He's a notorious womanizer, as well as being one of the worst sots and rogues in Brumley.
Quite right.
Well, really, Alderman Meggerty, I must say we are learning something tonight.
Of course we are. But everybody knows about that horrible old Meggerty. A girl I know had to see him at the town hall one afternoon, and she only escaped with a torn blouse.
Sheila.
Go on, please.
The girl saw me looking at her and then gave me a glance that was nothing less than a cry for help. So I went across and told Joe Meggerty some nonsense, that the manager had a message for him or something like that, got him out of the way, and then told the girl that if she didn't want any more of that sort of thing, she'd better let me take her out of there. She agreed at once.
And where did you go?
We went along to the county hotel, which I knew would be quiet at that time of night, and we had a drink or two and talked.
Did she drink much at that time?
No, she only had a port and lemonade or some such concoction. All she wanted was to talk, a little friendliness, and I gathered that Joe Meggerty's advances had left her rather shaken, as well as they might.
She talked about herself?
Yes. I asked her questions about herself. She told me her name was Daisy Renton, that she'd lost both parents, that she came originally from somewhere outside Brumley. She also told me that she had a job in one of the works here and had to leave after a strike. She said something about the shop too, but wouldn't say which it was, and she was deliberately vague about what happened. I couldn't get any exact details from her about her past life. She wanted to talk about herself just because she felt I was interested and friendly, but at the same time she wanted to be Daisy Renton and not Eva Smith. In fact, I heard that name for the first time tonight. What she did let slip, though she didn't mean to, was that she was desperately hard up and at that moment was actually hungry. I made the people at the county find some food for her.
And then you decided to keep her as your mistress.
What?
Of course, Mother. It was obvious from the start. Go on, Gerald. Don't mind Mother.
I discovered, not that night, but 2 nights later, when we met again, not accidentally this time, of course, and in fact, she hadn't a penny and was going to be turned out as the miserable back room she had. It happened that a friend of mine, Charlie Brunswick, had gone off to Canada for 6 months and had let me have the key of a nice little set of rooms he had in Morgan Terrace, and had asked me to keep an eye on them for him and use them if I wanted to. So I insisted on Daisy moving into those rooms, and I made her take some money to keep her going there. I want you to understand that I didn't install her there so I could make love to her. I made her go to Morgan Terrace because I was sorry for her. I didn't like the idea of her going back to the Palace Bar. I didn't ask for anything in return.
I see.
Yes, but why are you saying that to him? You ought to be saying it to me.
I suppose I ought, really. I'm sorry, Sheila. Somehow
I know. Somehow he makes you.
But she became your mistress.
Yes. I suppose it was inevitable. She was young, pretty and warm-hearted and intensely grateful. I became at once the most important person in her life. You understand?
Yes. She was a woman. She was lonely. Were you in love with her?
Just what I was going to ask.
I really must protest.
Why should you do any protesting? It was you who turned the girl out in the first place.
Well, I only did what any employer might have done. And what I was going to say was that I protest against the way in which my daughter, a young, unmarried girl, is being dragged into this.
Your daughter isn't living on the moon. She's here in Bromley too.
Yes, and it was I who had the girl turned out of her job at Millwoods, and I'm supposed to be engaged to Gerald. And I'm not a child, don't forget. I've a right to know. Were you in love with her, Gerald?
It's hard to say. I didn't feel about her as she felt about me.
Of course not. You were the wonderful fairy prince. You must have adored it, Gerald.
All right. I did for a time. Nearly any man would have done.
That's probably about the best thing you've said tonight. At least it's honest. Did you go and see her every night?
No. I wasn't telling you a complete lie when I said I'd been very busy at the works all the time. We were very busy, but of course, I did see a good deal of her.
I don't think we want any further details of this disgusting affair.
I do. And anyhow, we haven't had any details yet.
And you're not going to have any. You know, it wasn't disgusting.
It's disgusting to me.
Yes, but after all, you didn't come into this, did you, Mother?
Is there anything else you want to know? That you ought to know?
Yes. When did this affair end?
I can tell you exactly. In the first week of September. I had to go away for several weeks then, on business. And by that time, Daisy knew it was coming to an end. So I broke it off definitely before I went.
How did she take it?
Better than I'd hoped. She was very gallant about it.
Oh, that was nice for you.
No, it wasn't. She told me she'd been happier than she'd ever been before, but that she knew it couldn't last. Hadn't expected it to last. She didn't blame me at all. I wish to God she had now. Perhaps I'd feel better about it.
She had to move out of those rooms.
Yes, we'd agreed about that. She'd saved a little money during the summer. She lived very economically on what I'd allowed her. I didn't want to take any more from me. But I insisted on a parting gift of enough money. It wasn't so very much to see her through to the end of the year.
Did she tell you what she proposed to do after you'd left her?
No, she refused to talk about that. I got the idea once or twice from what she said that she thought of leaving Bromley. Whether she did or not, I don't know. Did she?
Yes. She went away for about 2 months to some seaside place.
By herself?
Yes. I think she went away to be alone, to be quiet, to remember all that had happened between you.
How do you know that?
She kept a rough sort of diary, and she said that she had to go away and be quiet and remember just to make it last longer. She felt there'd never been anything as good as that. As she said, there'd never be anything as good again for her, so she had to make it last longer.
I see. Well, I never saw her again, and that's all I can tell you.
That's all I want to know from you.
In that case, I'm rather more upset by this business than I'd probably appear to be. And, well, I'd like to be alone for a while. I'd be glad if you'd let me go.
Go where? Home?
No. I'll just get out, walk about for a while, if you don't mind. I'll come back.
All right, Mr. Croft.
But just in case you forget, or decide not to come back, Gerald, I think you better take this.
I see. Well, I was expecting this.
I don't dislike you as I did half an hour ago, Gerald. In fact, in some odd way, I rather respect you more than I've ever done before. I mean, I knew anyhow you were lying about those months last year when you hardly came near me. I knew there was something fishy about that time. And now, at least you've been honest. And I believe what you told us about the way you helped her at first, just out of pity. And it was my fault, really, that she was so desperate when you first met her. But this has made a difference. You and I aren't the same people who sat down to dinner here. We'd have to start all over again, getting to know each other.
Now, Sheila, I'm not defending him, but you must understand that a lot of young men...
Don't interfere, please, Father. Gerald knows what I mean, and apparently you don't.
Yes, I know what you mean. But I'm coming back if I may.
All right.
Well, really, I don't know. I think we've just about come to the end of this wretched business.
I don't think so. Excuse me.
You know, you never showed him that photograph of her.
No, it wasn't necessary. And I thought it better not to.
You have a photograph of this girl?
Yes, I think you'd better look at it.
I don't see any particular reason why I should.
Probably not, but you'd better look at it.
Very well.
You recognise her?
No, why should I?
Of course, she might have changed lately, but I can't believe she could have changed so much.
I don't understand you, Inspector.
You mean you don't choose to do, Mrs. Birling?
I meant what I said.
You're not telling me the truth.
Beg your pardon.
Look here, I'm not going to have this, Inspector. You will apologise at once.
Apologise for what? Doing my duty?
No, for being so offensive about it. I'm a public man.
Public men, Mr. Birling, have responsibilities as well as privileges.
Possibly. But you weren't asked to come here to talk to me about my responsibilities.
Let's hope not, though I'm beginning to wonder.
Does that mean anything, Sheila?
It means that we've no excuse now for putting on airs, and that if we've any sense, we won't try. Father threw this girl out because she asked for decent wages. I went and pushed her father out, right into the street, just because I was angry and she was pretty. Gerald set her up as his mistress and then dropped her when it suited him. And now you're pretending you don't recognise her from that photograph. I admit, I don't know why you should, but I know jolly well you did, in fact, recognise her from the way you looked. And if you're not telling the truth, why should the inspector apologise? And can't you see, both of you, you're making it worse?
That was the door again.
Gerald must have come back.
Unless your son has just gone out.
I'll see.
Mrs. Birling, you're a prominent member of the Bromley Women's Charity Organisation, aren't you?
Go on, Mother. You might as well admit it. Yes, she is. Why?
It's an organisation to which women in distress can appeal for help in various forms, isn't that so?
Yes, we've done a great deal of useful work in helping deserving cases.
There was a meeting of the interviewing committee 2 weeks ago.
I dare say there was.
You know very well there was, Mrs. Birling. You were in the chair.
And if I was, what business is it of yours?
Do you want me to tell you? In plain words?
That must have been Eric.
Have you been up to his room?
Yes, and I called out on both landings. It must have been Eric we heard go out then.
Silly boy. Where can he have gone to?
I can't imagine. But he was in one of his excitable, queer moods, and even though we don't need him here...
We do need him here. And if he's not back soon, I shall have to go and find him.
He's probably just gone to cool off. He'll be back soon.
I hope so.
And why should you hope so?
I'll explain when you've answered my questions, Mrs. Birling.
Is there any reason why my wife should answer questions from you, Inspector?
Yes, a very good reason. You'll remember that Mr. Croft told us, quite truthfully I believe, that he hadn't spoken to or seen Eva Smith since last September. But Mrs. Birling spoke to and saw her only 2 weeks ago.
Mother!
Is this true?
Yes, quite true.
She appealed to your organisation for help.
Yes.
Not as Eva Smith.
No, nor as Daisy Ranton.
As what then?
First, she called herself Mrs. Birling.
Mrs. Birling?
Yes, I think it was simply a piece of gross impertinence, quite deliberate, and naturally that was one of the things that prejudiced me against her case.
And I should think so. Damned impudence.
You admit being prejudiced against her case?
Yes.
Mother, she's just died a horrible death. Don't forget.
I'm very sorry, but I think she had only herself to blame.
Was it owing to your influence, as the most prominent member of the committee, that help was refused the girl?
Possibly.
Was it or was it not your influence?
Yes, it was. I didn't like her manner. She'd impertinently made use of our name, although she pretended afterwards it just happened to be the first she thought of. She had to admit, after I began questioning her, that she had no claim to the name, that she wasn't married, and that the story she told at first about her husband who deserted her was quite false. It didn't take me long to get the truth, or some of the truth, out of her.
Why did she want help?
You know very well why she wanted help.
No, I don't. I know why she needed help, but as I wasn't there, I don't know what she asked from your committee.
I don't think we need to discuss it.
You have no hope of not discussing it, Mrs. Birling.
If you think you can bring any pressure to bear upon me, Inspector, you're quite mistaken. Unlike the other three, I did nothing I'm ashamed of or that won't bear investigation. The girl asked for assistance. We were asked to look carefully into her claims made upon us. I wasn't satisfied with the girl's claim. She seemed to me not a good case, and so I used my influence to have it refused. And in spite of what's happened to the girl since, I consider I did my duty. So if I prefer not to discuss it any further, you have no power to make me change my mind.
Yes, I have.
No, you haven't. Simply because I've done nothing wrong and you know it.
I think you did something terribly wrong, and that you're going to spend the rest of your life regretting it. I wish you'd been with me tonight in the infirmary. You'd have seen...
No, please, not that again. I've imagined it enough already.
Then the next time you imagine it, just remember that this girl was going to have a child.
No, oh, horrible. Horrible. How could she want to kill herself?
Because she'd been turned out and turned down too many times. This was the end.
Mother, you must have known.
It was because she was going to have a child that you went for assistance to your mother's committee.
Look here, this wasn't Gerald Croft.
No, nothing to do with him.
Oh, thank goodness for that, though I don't know why I should care now.
And you've nothing further to tell me, eh?
I'll tell you what I told her. Go and look for the father of the child. It's his responsibility.
That doesn't make it any the less yours. She came to you for help at a time when no woman could have needed it more. And you not only refused it yourself, but you saw to it that the others refused it too. She was here alone, friendless, almost penniless, desperate. She needed not only money, but advice, sympathy, friendliness. You've had children. You must have known what she was feeling, and you slammed the door in her face.
Mother, I think it was cruel and vile.
I must say, Sybil, that when this comes out at an inquest, it isn't going to do us much good. The press might easily take it up.
Well, stop it, both of you. And please remember, before you start accusing me of anything again, that it wasn't I who had her turned out of her employment, which probably began it all. In the circumstances, I think I was justified. The girl had begun by telling us a pack of lies. Afterwards, when I got at the truth, I discovered that she knew who the father was. She was quite certain about that. And so I told her it was her business to make him responsible. If he refused to marry her, and in my opinion, he ought to be compelled to, then he must at least support her.
And what did she reply to that?
Oh, a lot of silly nonsense.
What was it?
Whatever it was, I know it made me finally lose all patience with her. She was giving herself ridiculous airs. She was claiming elaborate fine feelings and scruples that were simply absurd for a girl in her position.
Her position now is that she lies with her burnt out inside on a slab. Don't stammer and yammer at me again, man. I'm losing all patience with you people. What did she say?
She said that the father was only a youngster, silly and wild and drinking too much. There couldn't be any question of marrying him. It would be wrong for them both. He had given her money, but she didn't want to take any more money from him.
Why didn't she want to take any more money from him?
All a lot of nonsense. I didn't believe a word of it.
I'm not asking if you believed it. I want to know what she said. Why didn't she want to take any more money from this boy?
Oh, she had some fancy reason, as if a girl of that sort would ever refuse money.
I warn you, you're making it worse for yourself. What reason did she give for not taking any more money?
Her story was that he'd said something one night when he was drunk that gave her the idea that it wasn't his money.
Where had he got it from then?
He'd stolen it.
So she came to you for assistance because she didn't want to take stolen money.
That's the story she finally told, after I'd refused to believe her original story that she was a married woman who'd been deserted by her husband. I didn't see any reason to believe that one story should be any truer than the other. Therefore, you're quite wrong to suppose I shall regret what I did.
But if her story was true, if this boy had been given her stolen money, then she came to you for help because she wanted to keep this youngster out of any more trouble. Isn't that so?
Possibly. But it sounded ridiculous to me, so I was perfectly justified in advising my committee not to allow her claim for assistance.
You're not even sorry now, when you know what happened to the girl.
I'm sorry that she should have come to such a horrible end, but I accept no blame for it all.
Who is to blame then?
First, the girl herself.
What, for letting father and me have her chucked out of her jobs?
Secondly, I blame the young man who was the father of the child. She was going to have, if, as she said, belonged to her class and was some drunken young idler, then that's all the more reason why he shouldn't escape. He should be made an example of. If the girl's death is due to anybody, then it's due to him.
And if her story is true that he was stealing money?
There's no point in assuming that.
But suppose we do. What then?
Well, then he'd be entirely responsible because the girl wouldn't have come to us and have been refused assistance if it hadn't been for him.
So he's the chief culprit anyhow?
Certainly, and he ought to be dealt with very severely.
No, Mother, stop. Stop.
Be quiet, Sheila.
But don't you see?
You're behaving like a hysterical child tonight. And if you take some steps to find this young man and then make sure he's compelled to confess in public his responsibility, instead of staying here asking quite unnecessary questions, then you really would be doing your duty.
Don't worry, Mrs. Birling. I shall do my duty.
I am glad to hear it.
No hushing up, eh? Make an example of the young man, eh? Public confession of responsibility, hmm?
Certainly. I consider it your duty. And now, no doubt, you'd like to say goodnight.
Not yet. I'm waiting.
Waiting for what?
To do my duty.
No, Mother, don't you see?
But surely, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Look, Inspector, you're not trying to tell us that my boy is mixed up in this?
If he is, then we know what to do, don't we? Mrs. Birling has just told us.
My God! But look here.
I don't believe it. I won't believe it.
Mother, I begged you and begged you to stop.
Inspector holds up a hand. We hear the front door. They wait, looking towards the door. Eric enters, looking extremely pale and distressed. He meets their inquiring stares. The curtain falls quickly. Cue EastEnders music. Okay. So again, if you're watching this at home, or you might be watching this in a lesson in school, this is a good time to pause, have a go at answering the 3 questions on here. So we've got, how successful is Priestley's inclusion of the inspector? What do we learn about gender in this act? Yes, this act really focuses on the relationship between Gerald and Daisy Renton, and then on Mrs. Birling as well, and Mrs. Birling's involvement. And who do we like and dislike at this stage? Who are really emerging as the heroes and the villains of this play? So you might want to pause and come back to our discussion in a moment. So the inspector then, the inspector really comes into his own, I think, in this act, and you can tell the way Mr. Stanton played that he was growing increasingly frustrated with the Birlings. Did you feel that, Sir? Is that how you wanted to kind of portray the inspector in this act?
Yeah, partially, yeah, because they are all in the wrong, aren't they? But also there's a massive enjoyment in it all. Just, going in and complete, knocking something down that needs to be knocked down. Sheila keeps talking about building that wall, doesn't she? And the inspector knocking it down, and there's that lovely sense of being able to wipe the smug smile off somebody's face when you know they're in the wrong, and you suddenly have the power to do it.
I think that's especially at the end when Mrs. Birling has gone on about, holding this father of the child to account, and the inspector doing his duty, and then he waits to say, well, I am doing my duty, and just that moment that she realizes, and she's just.
Well, it's lovely because of the way that he uses Sheila to build it up, because Sheila catches on, doesn't she, 2 minutes before, and you've got Sheila desperately trying to to shut her mother up, and her mother just sails blithely on. It's good writing, actually.
And especially when Mrs. Birling has been just so awful and horrendous and shown no remorse. I mean, Miss Ormondy and I have been friends for a long time. I absolutely hate her by the end of this act. She's awful. And I think the inspector, does that so well. Yeah. So gender, key theme, I think, in this act. What do we learn about gender in this act?
There's double standards, aren't there? So, Gerald is quite obviously Mrs. Birling is like, oh, it's so disgusting, Gerald. But he's essentially a young man who's like, sowing his wild oats. And when Eva or Daisy is essentially in trouble for the consequences, she has to face the very real consequences of having relations out of wedlock, and how she's treated is completely different to how Gerald's treated.
I think a lot of students will have done in year 8 the Victorian themes and theories unit, and in there it's about when they've done things like they've read parts of Jekyll and Hyde and other extracts from Victorian literature, this idea about respectability, and you see that with the gentleman Megati down in the Palace Bar, and how Birling's like, kind of shocked, but then Gerald's like, no, he's like that, and probably all men like that. So there's this kind of veil, this sense that everything, all this kind of any sort of affairs or playing about, etc., is probably done. It's just very, very well hidden.
Or it's
the fact that Sheila also knows, doesn't she? Because the girls, even in their class, the girls talk about it. That he's a pest, and you can't be on your own with him, because there's the girl that Sheila knows who had her blouse torn. And it's this whole nothing spoken, is it? Because he's Alderman Megati. So everybody privately knows it. But if you don't talk about it, then it's not real in some way. Whereas obviously poor old Eva or Daisy doesn't have that. She doesn't have that protection, does she?
Probably all the women will know, won't they? Everyone will know. It's not necessarily about what goes on. It's about who knows or who finds out about what's going on. That's the more important.
Except maybe Mrs. Birling.
And the inspector is all about exposure, isn't he? He's about exposing the truth. But
and Birling assumes that Sheila's just going to take him back. When she says, I'll take the ring, and Birling is like, oh no, Sheila. But because it just thinks, well, you just have to accept it. You know, that's what men do. Just deal with it. You know, marry him anyway.
And Sheila kind of is starting to really emerge, isn't she, as the hero of this play? This is how I feel in Act 2. This is my own personal reading, I think, of the play. But, you know, by the end of Act 2, she is really starting to, she seems to be the only character at this point who's actually learned anything, and has actually accepted responsibility for what she's done. And she's supposed to be the most immature one of the lot of them, in some ways. And we see that we've got Mr. Fitzgerald back, looking a bit more dishevelled than he did in Act 1. The absence of Eric, I think, as well, is from Act 2 is quite interesting. That he has obviously been absent when this conversation's been going on about him, this sort of wild sort of youngster who's got this girl pregnant. And I think that's made even more dramatic by the fact that we know very little about Eric at this point. We've not seen him very much. He's not been on stage that much. And so obviously that builds up to that climactic point in the finale of Act 3. And I think we've sort of covered that last question then. Who do we like and dislike at this stage? I've talked about Sheila, and she's, you know, a character that I'm starting to like more and more as the play progresses. Who do we dislike?
Mrs. Birling, obviously. She's horrible. I think Gerald's an interesting one. So I think Gerald, in many ways, is painted in a fairly sympathetic way. The idea that he at least cared about her, and the fact, you know, he's upset, visibly upset when he, you know, the realization that she's actually dead. So I think that's quite interesting, because clearly he still did an awful thing, but I think in some ways he's painted as a more sympathetic character. I don't know how anybody else feels about him.
He's got away with it almost, isn't there?
He's morally ambiguous, I think, Gerald.
Yeah.
Whenever I talk about Gerald, as I say, he's neither kind of all good or all bad, and he's the only character who shows her any kindness, but then he does, you know, use the power he has over it to his advantage, and he quickly dismisses it.
He says about the affair with Daisy Rent, and he says it was inevitable. So it's almost this sense that affairs like that, and, you know, getting in those situations, they just happen to people like him, or happen to men more generally. It's almost accepted, perhaps, that that's just what goes on, and perhaps he redeems himself by telling the truth, in, you know, or eventually telling the truth, and also by the actions that he took to kind of protect her from this predator.
But did he protect her though? Because he's another predator, isn't he? Like, like Sheila makes that point about him being the fairy prince and everything, and he's painting his own version of the story. And while it's clear he had feelings for her, he doesn't dress it up as being finer feelings. So he's just like a predator, but like
he's
younger,
like shining heart, though, isn't it? Kind of predator.
Yeah, but he's still like preys on someone who is in a really like vulnerable and awkward position, and financially and emotionally, and sets her up. And obviously he knew, like, he's quite open that he knows that she feels more for him than he felt for her. But he still kind of like gets his money's worth, and then, you know, like finishes everything off at the end of the summer, and it's all very neat and tidy. And now he's very sad because she's dead.
And I think we're supposed to sort of see Gerald. I think we're sort of supposed to see Gerald, you know, we compare him to Birling in that first act, and Birling is just so obviously an idiot, outright, you know, complete idiot. And then Gerald almost seems like the perfect gentleman, and, you know, exactly the sort of person you would want your daughter to marry. And he sort of very patiently puts up with Birling's rambling speeches and sort of reacts in totally the right way. Actually, does that make him more dangerous? You know, he's this man who has, you know, in a different way, exploited this vulnerable girl, but hides behind this sort of veneer of respectability. And I think when Gerald returns in Act 3, we can maybe again start to consider his character and what we think of it. So
he's said to be 30 as well, isn't it? And you think the only reason he hasn't produced the same effect, if you like, that Eric's affair with her has produced. Eric's affair is a kind of echo of Gerald's, but it's more squalid, it's more unsuccessful, it's more desperate. It's simply because Gerald is 30, he's experienced, he knows how to conduct these things, therefore it makes him seem less predatory, less desperate, but he's in some ways, many times more dangerous than someone like Eric.
Because he can get out of it.
Yeah.
And drunk and can't kind of tidy it all up.
Well, Eric's a car crash, isn't he? So
I think that sort of sets us up quite nicely then for Act 3. So I hope you all enjoyed part 2. Part 3 is coming up.